This class and this series of classes in memory of my father, David Ben Colin, Kenef Shotzra B'Sorah Chaim. We're going to explore the Megillat Esther, and specifically the politics of Megillat Esther, and that's what I'd like to talk about. It's a serious book, and let me just share a screen over here. The politics of Purim, power, manipulation, strategy, and faith in the service of Am Yisrael. And the story of Purim has so many things in it, and that is what I'd like to explore from a particular vantage point of looking at the politics, which is basically the art of finding what's possible, taking into account the situation that a person is in and the restrictions that a person is under. And the story of Purim is a story of Am Yisrael outside of Eretz Yisrael, ostensibly without any power, but how Mordechai and Esther managed to get the power that they need to carry out great things. And it's normally we don't really have a lot of time to study the book of Esther. It's on Purim, the atmosphere is one of festivity, and there's it's at the end of a fast day, there's noise, and we're trying to get through the reading of the Megillah and understand as much as we can. But I think starting now about a month before Purim, we'll be able to explore some of the aspects of the book of Esther and see the politics behind it, the greatness of Mordechai and of Esther, and of the characters involved. So without further ado, this is relevant to life outside of Israel and also life in Israel in the current time. It has a story of faith, a story of courageous decision making, and we're not going to get too much into the historical aspect of it. We'll touch about a little bit, but how it relates to Persian history at the time. We'll touch on it a little bit, but not too much about that. But I really want to explore is the book itself and the ideas behind it and within it, and why the Hachamim decided at the end to include this book in the canon. It wasn't just an obvious choice. There were those who were against including it in the canon, but the Hachamim decided at the end to include this book in the canon. So we're going to look at the text, the text of the book of Esther. I'm taking this from Sefaria, and so the book opens up, as we know, we have a king, Achashverosh, probably is what's known as Xerxes or Xerxes. He's the grandson of Daryavesh. Daryavesh is the grandson of Cyrus, the son of Daryavesh, the grandson of Koresh, and he through Cyrus's daughter, probably about the end of the 5th century BC, the beginning of the 5th century BC, 183 to 464, more or less is when Ahasuerus reigned, and he has 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia to Nubia, and if you see over here on the, can you see my cursor? Does anyone? If you can see my cursor, it's from India to Ethiopia, really taking most of the civilized world at the time, the Near East and the Fertile Crescent and everything in between. And we're dealing with an empire. Now, in an empire, there's a problem of how to rule an empire. You have a lot of people, a lot of different types of people, different languages, and we know that was one of the problems in the empire expands, and then it gets too unwieldy. So it becomes unwieldy, and it got out of control. And good empires find a way of controlling. Ahasuerus doesn't have strength. He's a weak ruler, and really what we see in the first chapter doesn't mention the Jews at all, although the rabbis, the Hachamim, bring the Jews into it, and they try to say that Jews were at the parties, but really the whole purpose of the first chapter is to show Ahasuerus and his show of great power but really his display of weakness behind that show of great power. If it was about the Jews alone, we could have started from the second or third chapter of Megillat Esther, but the author of this book of Megillat Esther wants us to really get a sense of this man and of the rules of what goes on within this empire. And he has a party, a banquet, third year of his reign, and he calls in all the administration of Persia and Paras and Madai, the nobles and governors, 180 days, 6 months. He's showing the vast riches of his empire. When a person makes a show of power and glamour in the way that he's doing, one has to have a sense that he feels a sense of weakness. And this is a Hashverosh. This is the ostensible most powerful ruler at the time. And we see that he's not the one that expanded the empire. That was Darius, or Darius. So he's the one that needs to show that he can rule this vast monster of an empire. And he does it by having a party to show everyone, look how wealthy I am, look how powerful I am. And he really, in effect, by doing that, is displaying his weakness. In addition to that, Ahasuerus has a 7 day, at the end of the 180 days, 7 days of a rule of letting the people of Shushan, of Birah, have run of the palace in drunken revelry. There's no really solid administration going on there. All the governors and all the people are there enjoying the party, and this is what's going on in Ahasuerus's empire. He's trying to show that he has a lot of power and a lot of glamour, but essentially what he is showing his weakness. The people are in the courts, they have drinking cups from different things, and you have a description, a very, very detailed description of the beauty of the area, of the palace, and the cups, and drinking without restrictions. He wants to impress wealth, power, drink, but really he's weak. In fact, in all of the book of Esther, Ahasuerus never makes one decision on his own. Everything is through his advisors. Everything is through manipulation. He wants the people's love. He wants the people to bear him, but he is really showing his weakness throughout. And that is the nature, the reason for this first chapter of Megillat Esther is to give us a sense of this person, this powerful. Has the power to kill people at his whim. On the one hand, on the other hand, he really lacks any administrative ability, any decision-making ability. Completely dependent on what people think of him, and completely manipulable the way weak people are. Now, we're in this thing. We're in this next section. We meet his wife. He probably had a lot of wives and a lot of harems and a lot of. He had someone who was in charge of the harem, the king's harem. So he had, but this is the queen. This is the one woman that was able to be sort of to stand up, and essentially she's powerless. She's the wife in a harem, but she's the queen, Vashti, and with all his show of power, right? His icing on the cake, the cherry on top of the cake, is the show of Queen Vashti. The word Vashti in Persian means something like "there's no one better than her," and she was not going to be used. And we don't know why she didn't come, but it could be that she was not a submissive woman, and she was a strong woman, strong enough for him to stand up to and to show that, if he can get her to do his will, that he really does have power. And in the midst of all this, merriment and the height of the party. And the seventh day, he calls Vashti, and she decides not to come. Why? She's not going to take part of this sham. He wants to show his beauty, her beauty. He wants to show her royalty, and how the fact that she's going to she's to do his will. And at the height of all this, the queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command, turns Ahasuerus into a laughing stock, and it makes it a great show of his ultimate impotence. And she is actually showing the power that she has in this kingdom. In fact, what we can say is that in this story, it's the women that eventually have the power. Queen Vashti, with 187 days, Ahasuerus is trying to show his strength and his power, and he's trying to impress everyone. And then in one refusal, this woman takes over, takes all his show and makes it into nothing. Shows ultimately his impotence. We're going to learn later on, of course, Esther, in a different tactic, in a different way, is able to get her will done. And we're going to expand more on this later on in the Megillah, in the next Shurim, where we see that in addition to the woman, the seemingly powerless woman, ultimately having power over the king, this might be the way that Am Yisrael in exile, outside of its land, seemingly powerless, are ultimately able to, with their faith, ultimately able to control their destiny. And this is could be a symbol of our history.
Why do you think, Rabbi, why do you think she ever dreamt she'd get away with something like that in that society?
She knew who she was. She knew the king's dependence upon her. She knew that the king would maybe make the king even seem more impotent if he was have to kill her. And
so you're saying she thought the odds are well in her favor to be successful. She was surprised when she gets zapped, so to speak.
Well, she doesn't get zapped, really. She just gets removed from her position.
Removed from power.
Yeah, but look, we can't really say the relationship was anything. If we can judge from the relationship with Esther, she probably doesn't really have too many intimate time with the king. It was much more of a marriage of not convenience, but of showing, this is the power I am. I'm powerful over this powerful woman, and therefore she was not going to play this game. She sought opportunity to gain power and to show up the king.
Okay.
She actually turns Ahasuerus into a laughingstock by refusing to come, and you can imagine the king's anger. The king, and what Ahasuerus does is he makes it into not a personal thing, not a personal issue, his own anger. It was a personal thing, but he turns it into an issue of state. It's a problem for the whole empire, and that's why he consults the sages to know what the procedure was. There's laws and there's rules, and the queen not coming had to be handled by the state. In fact, it's a brilliant move by him. Don't make it personal, make it a matter of the state. And here he calls his advisors. He has 7 advisors, and really, this is a great thing about the politics of the time. Here we see Ahasuerus depending on 7 ministers. What is the result of this? A fairly benign edict at the end, and we're going to look at it in a minute. But Memuchan takes up the idea that this is not just a personal, private insult. In fact, this is what Ahasuerus wanted at the outset also, that it should be the problem of everyone, of the whole empire. And Memuchan does that. He says, what should be done? this is not, so he asked, Hashalosh asked the king, what should be done? So Memuchan says, this is an offense not only against the king, but against all the officials, against all the peoples, all the provinces. This is going to lead to wives despising their husbands throughout the whole empire. In fact, this is going to be a day where women are going to take power from their husbands. Now, when you hear this is kind of absurd. This is, I think, trying to take the king and exaggerate his absurdity even further, but the king falls for it. And Memuchan's idea was to make Vashti a living widow. Probably like all the other women in his harem. To make Vashti, she'll have the title of being the king's wife, but not the queen any longer. It's to divest her of all her power and to cause it to be powerless, but still a wife of the king. And this would restore Ahasuerus's battered sense of power. This would restore the feeling that not only Ahasuerus has power, but everyone has power. Every man has power, and the decree that comes out, and this is the decree that comes out is one that really is that shows really that when you have to make a decree that the men will be the king of their castles and that the men should be the rulers of their homes, right? So that this is really showing the impotence of the king and the absurdity of the king to accept this. It's really a sign of a lack of power, and it's really a sign of a sense of weakness. What we have here, though, is also the ways that the country works, and this is an important setup for what goes on further. The laws of what the laws are, and we have a sense of the administration. We have a sense of this weak king Ahasuerus, and a very benign edict that's done at the end that every man should wield authority in his home and speak in the language of his own nation. Really, a sense of okay, it's done. It shows weakness. It shows and it shows the rule of the Persian Empire. And that's the purpose of this first chapter. It's not about the Jews. It's not about anything about the Jews, but it's a sense of getting the sense of who Paro is, how he makes decisions, the weakness, his attempt to control, but really ultimately showing that he's an absurd, he's a farce. We get into chapter 2, and in chapter 2, we're talking about it 3 years later. Historically, in those 3 years, the Persia goes to war with Greece and loses. It's not so relevant for the story, but it is relevant. Ahasuerus is feeling sorry about what he did, and he's feeling sad. He misses Vashti. He thought of Vashti, and he thought about what happened, and he's sad. In the king's court, they try to curry favor with the king. It's always there's always people who are trying to get on the king's good side, and the king's servants give an idea to him. And there's several times throughout Tanakh where there's a king that has difficulty, and his servants try to appease him and try to give him something that is lacking by doing a search throughout the whole kingdom. And one of the times is with David HaMelech at the end of his life. We see David doesn't even respond to what his servants say of searching for a woman to warm him up. We see Shaul HaMelech is also the king. King Saul is also very melancholy, and they make a search throughout the whole kingdom to find someone to cheer up, and they find David. And here we have a Hashverosh who is the strongest of the three, and that he's able to decree to carry it out. And they make the idea of having these beautiful young virgins come to Shoshana Birah, to the fortress, and this whole thing is a great idea to find a replacement for Vashti, and also to satisfy Hashverosh. Now, I don't think it's a matter of having, the sexuality. I think it's more a matter of Hashverosh feeling that he has control and domination, and this is what the Hashverosh wants. He has these young virgins. Think about it. Really, what the servants are proposing is that a Hashverosh become a serial rapist. I mean, he's going to have each night a new woman who never knew anyone else and will never know anyone else, never know any other man. And these women are not asked to be there; they're forced, and it's really a kind of institutionalized rape that's going on over here, and it's really asserting again the power over these women, but really in the sense that this is what has to be done. They have to be forced to come to him. They're taking to Heged, the king's eunuch, and they're given whatever they need, the cosmetics, and they're made up for that one night that they have, that one night with the king. And the king acted upon this proposal, and he carries it out. And this is what the king is going to do to bring some sense of power back to him. Now, what is the wife that he's looking for? Does he want another Vashti? I mean, he has a harem. He has women that submit to him, and all these women that are coming are going to submit to him. He wants someone like Vashti, but not like Vashti. He wants someone who's strong and someone who's not submissive, but not someone who's going to stand up to him and embarrass him the way Vashti did. Now, Esther is taken, now the first time we're introduced to Mordechai. We're introduced to Mordechai, and his situation is one of exile, one of powerlessness. We don't know too much about him from this book. We do know that he's exiled and he's taking care of Hadassah, of Esther. We can mention some point about the names. The names are clearly Babylonian names. They're names of gods. This might show some of the assimilation that was going on. It was very acceptable, as it was in various periods, to have names that are that. But that's not the point of this, of bringing in. This is about Mordechai, who's living not just in the capital city, but near the fortress of Shushan. He's a person that's around the court. He's a person that wants influence, and yet the Jews are powerless in exile. And we're talking about Esther. Mordechai did the great service of taking care of Esther, and Esther is taken with all the kings, with all the women, with all the king's officers take Esther, and Esther was taken also to Hegai, the guardian of the woman. Now, this seemingly is a side fact. Why do we care about the cosmetics and the 6 months of this and the 6 months of that and all the types of things? It just, for people who don't know the story, you can read it over here. It's to contrast Esther with all the other women. And it gives us a hint why Esther pleased Ahasuerus. And this is I think the reason for all of this lengthy description. There was so much work put into these women, and the women, for this one night, this one chance they had to influence the king and have become the queen, they put a lot of work into it. Esther, now all these women, they were not experienced. They were virgins. Esther decided to submit to this situation, but not only to submit to it, but to see what her best chances of winning this competition would be. And she decided to take an approach, which we see later on that Mordechai takes as well, which is she's going to rely on the expert in order to please Ahasuerus. And to do it, by the way, Ahasuerus's guardian of the woman, who knows Ahasuerus's likes and dislikes, and she's going to rely on the expertise of this man. And Esther won his favor. And he's the one that actually makes Esther able to win this competition. I see a question, Amy. Raised hand. Okay.
No.
Okay. So Esther is taken. Esther submits and tries to do everything to please Ahasuerus. And we see the way she behaves to the Haggai, and that's how she's able ultimately to please Ahasuerus and to be chosen. The Jews in exile are a hidden people. They have to hide who they are, and it's we can't really be completely ourselves when we're in another country. There's just as a side point. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, in his book, in his famous book, Emile, puts in the mouth of one of the monks that Emile comes across, that says, we'll never know what the Jews will be until they're able to be themselves without looking over their shoulder, without being afraid of what other people will say. And even in the best of countries, and even in the most accepting of countries, we still, to some degree, have to say, well, what's going to happen? What are the rulers going to say about us? And this was true even before the current situation in America. It was true in almost every country. Till we have our own freedom in our own country, we can't really be ourselves. So Esther and Mordechai hiding who they were was a point of keeping the information strategically for when it could be used. And Mordechai was every day around the court. He's not just a weak Jew, and he's not just a court Jew. He's a strategic person that knows where to be and how to use whatever advantage that he has. And here we have the carrying on the description of how each woman would come to the king. We're going to not read all of this, but the king, each woman had one night with the king, and then she would go to the house of the harem, where she would never see the king again unless he wanted her. Esther, on the other hand, was who followed whatever Haggai said. As we said, she was taken to Ahasuerus in the royal palace. 7th year of his reign, so we have a total of 4 years since the beginning of the story. And the king loved Esther, and she puts her the crown on her head. She's made the queen. He's able to decide that Esther is a woman that is on the one hand able to submit to him on the one hand, but he doesn't need submission. He also sees that Esther is a person that knows how to get favor in the eyes of people, and that's what he wants as well. And Ahasuerus chooses Esther. We don't really know too much about the choice, but we can assume that it had to do with Esther's ability to sense what people want and to provide that for the people around her, like she did with Haggai. Esther doesn't reveal who she is and who she was. Now, the last part of chapter 2, we have a story that's going to play a big role later on. Esther does what she said, Mordechai's bidding, and what she does exactly what Mordechai wants. Mordechai is a person that's in the palace. He's not a weak person, but he's a strategic person, and he finds out of the rebellion that's going on. this is a very major point, and it presented Mordechai with a decision. Bigtan and Teresh, they're going to carry out an assassination. Mordechai learns of it, tells it to Esther, Esther tells it in the name of Mordechai, and they found out that Bigtan and Teresh are killed. It's a couple of psukim. It seems to be like a passing event, but it's critical about Mordechai's decision about who to follow, and what it means to be under a totalitarian, all-powerful king that has the power to kill people at whim. What do you do in that situation? And Mordechai could say, "I will be part of the rebellion," but really, what will happen as a Jew in an exiled situation, he's not going to be the one that has the power. So someone else will take the power, and he'll be just as weak as he was before. Mordechai makes a courageous decision, finding out about this assassination attempt and its attempted rebellion, to not only submit to the king, not only take part in what the king is doing, but he also makes a decision to inform, to curry favor with the king, and be the king's eyes and ears. Because the king has a lot of people who submit to him. The king has a lot of people who will do his will and are very flattering of him. But the king needs the people who will be his eyes and ears and act according to his will, carrying out his will, even when he's not around. And Mordechai decides to do that with this weak king, knowing that if he can curry favor with the king, not just by submitting, but by carrying out what the king would want, he might be able to use that in the future. The connections between Mordechai in the foreign kingdom of Paras, of Persia, is reminiscent, and many have made this connection, to Yosef in Egypt. It's also a situation where Yosef is not just doing what the king wants, submitting to the king, but he's acting in the king's favor, thinking for the king. The king has a lot of people. He has a lot of people's bodies. He has a lot of people he can command, and he can command them to do his will. But the king is not all-knowing, and therefore, what the king needs is people who will carry out his will, even without him saying it. Yosef does that in Mitzrayim, eventually getting all the agricultural lands and making the king very, very wealthy, and also making the king very powerful in the real sense, not just in the authority that he has as being, in Egypt he was considered a god, but also in the real sense of owning everything. Yosef does that for Paro. Daniel, in Sefer Daniel, does that for Nebuchadnezzar in that situation, and Mordechai is going to act as the people's, as the king's eyes and ears. He makes a decision. He'd rather have this weak king, who he eventually might be able to manipulate, rather than anyone else. And he sees this as a very strong possibility for helping the Jewish people, although we don't know this at this point. All we know at this point is that Mordechai decides courageously to be on the side of those who will not be to be on the side of the king, and not those who will want to kill him. So he acts in the king's interest and does not submit to the king.
Yeah. Tell Joey to try Frida's phone. I did it on Barbara's phone. It worked. I don't know why.
Okay, you got it.
Okay, so now you might say about Mordechai and Esther that they are. How can they be in the side of this terrible king? I mean, he's the weak. He's serial rapist. He is just spreading out his wealth in a way that's
Julie called you. I don't know
So terrible.
I'm on my license.
And
There you go.
I want to return the.
Who?
We hear Barbara. We're hearing Barbara.
let's see how to mute this.
Barbara,
You have
Joey
to
Namer
mute
has
your
to mute.
phone.
Joey Namer, you have to mute.
Okay, I handle that. Anyone wants to talk is invited to open their phones. Or so now, who is the? You might say, "How Mordechai and Esther? They're just currying favor with the Hashenosh. How can they do such a thing?" Now, politics is the art of the possible, and yes, it requires compromise at times. So, yes, the politics of Purim required Mordechai and Esther to make certain compromises and sacrifices. Clearly, Mordechai knew that when Esther was taken to the king's palace, she wasn't going to be a tzedekah. It is impossible. She knew what he knew, and Esther knew what was going on and what that was going for. And instead of trying to get out of it, I don't know if it was possible, Esther and Mordechai make a decision. They're going to play the political game. They're going to be involved in the politics, and it's a compromise. Was this compromise legitimate? Is this compromise legitimate in general? And the way we can say whether a political compromise is legitimate is when we see what is the purpose of that compromise? What is the purpose of playing the political game? And there's no way of not being political when you're dealing with society. It is the nature of society that there's politics involved, even in the smallest society, even in the community, even in a synagogue, even in a family. It's part of the way that we work together is through compromise and through also thinking strategically. The question whether that is legitimate or not all depends on what the purpose and what is done with that compromise to what end. And what is done only for self-interest that goes against the public interest, then that compromise is illegitimate. But of course, we'll see how the politics of Purim that Mordechai and Esther use to the benefit of Am Yisrael and to the benefit of the Persian kingdom itself. We'll see that definitely their political compromise was legitimate. We've done the first two chapters of Megillat Esther. In some, we see a weak king. We see how the Persian Empire works. We see the king who's not able to make one decision alone in his life. And we see Mordechai and Esther able to position themselves in a way that will become critical later on. I want to open now for questions. If anyone would like to comment, I'm going to unmute. Let's see. Yes, allow everyone to unmute. Whoever wants to unmute themselves can ask a question or anything, comment. It's open to people.
I have a question.
Yes.
We see in almost every government, even in our governments, advisors, let's say to Joe Biden and to Putin, isn't it commonplace for these rulers of the governments of their empires to have these advisors? It's
common, and it's almost expected. You have to say that every king, every ruler is going to have advisors. The question is, how much is the king involved in making the decisions, and how does he work with these advisors? Do you have what kind of advisor does he have? I want to give an example. Sorry.
No, my follow-up question is: most kings and rulers are really puppets. They're just figureheads. The whole thing is scripted out for them. So it's not a position of weakness. It was just assumed that this is the way it should be.
Well, I want to give an example, a counterexample to a push.
New Jersey.
And that counterexample is Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln chose for his advisors his political rivals in his party. He didn't choose yes men. He chose the people who ran against him, and one after the other were his political rivals. And there actually was a book written a couple of years ago called Team of Rivals, which brings out this point that a good ruler would want to get the people who disagree with him and not just yes men. So the ruler ultimately is the one that makes a decision. And he gets a lot of advice from people who only have part of the picture and also part of the responsibility. So, I mean, in the current Corona situation, I'll give an example in Israeli society today. The prime minister received advice from the health authority that he should lock down the country, close it down more, have more days of quarantine. And the prime minister decided not to follow that route. The prime minister decided that he's responsible for not only for the health of the country, but for the economic viability of the country. And so every ruler, every king, every president has advisors. How and what how to listen to them and what to expect from them is what makes for a good ruler and a weak ruler. In chapter 3, for example, we're going to see that Ahasuerus changes from having multiple advisors to putting one person in charge of giving him advice, and that's what we see where it becomes really his downfall, and where that's where Mordechai takes action. So we have the opening of Purim. It's a political book that has Mordechai, and instead it has the Jews being powerless, but nevertheless learning how to work within that powerless situation to get the control. June, you have a question?
Yeah,
Go ahead. Sorry. You can unmute if you want.
I was just thinking that it's such a metaphor for life because we get so locked into our own echo chambers, only listening to, one channel of news or one pundit that we favor all the time. And I just feel like, it's just very exemplary of life that you have to sort of listen to all sides and then, come to your own conclusion and your own, formulate your own opinion based on a full, well-rounded view of the situation. That's all I wanted to say.
Well, it's a very relevant comment. They found, by the way, that there was a study done not too long ago that the more people are exposed to social media, the more extreme their views are, and the less understanding they have of the opposing view. The more they listen to social media and listen to their own echo chambers, the more extreme they view those who disagree with them as having extreme views, where those who disagree with them might not have those extreme views. But the more people are exposed to social media, the more they demonize and extremize the other side. So definitely one of the ways that we have to deal with this polarization that's happening in many societies in America and in Israel to some extent is to find ways of bridging the gap and listening to opinions that are different than ours. And there's an approach called radical listening, radical listening is from the idea of listening it to the root, which means listening to the other person, the person who disagrees with you, not in a way that feels threatened, but in a way of curiosity. As the same way, when you're exposed to the unknown, you sometimes can be afraid. And when you hear someone else's opinion that differs from yours, you can be afraid. But there's another way of looking at that opinion. Many of us like to travel. I'm not one of them, but many people like to travel to foreign countries. Why do you go to a foreign country? Why do you expose yourself to something new and different? It's because you have curiosity, because you want to find out more, you want to expand your horizons, you want to see something new. When we are exposed to an opinion that differs from ours, we can react in a way of fear, in a way of closing down, in a way of not even listening at all and thinking we know what they're going to say. That's one reaction. Or we can react by radical listening to the root, listening with the curiosity, like a tourist in a new country, letting that person and bringing that person out to explain their position as broadly as possible. We might learn something new. Not saying that we should all jump on the other side of where we are, but approaching it with the curiosity. Thank you for the comment, June. And it's the book of Esther has a lot to offer us. Look forward to seeing you again next week. If anyone has any other questions, you can contact me during the week. And have a great rest of the afternoon. Thank you for joining me in the middle of the afternoon.